Hi everyone, my name is Steph, this is the Novelty Corner and welcome or welcome back to my channel. Today I have a Books Beside My Bed video for you where I wrap up the last 7 days worth of reading. This is the second week of, or this is the wrap up of the second week of the Amazing Readathon, and I read 18 things. Technically 17. One of the books that I'm going to talk about is a book that I've been reading long term with my class, and that was The Wild Robot by Peter Brown. So we finally finished that. It took us about a term to read it because grade 2s and attention spans, but really fun, enjoyable experience. This was a reread for me. I haven't read it since I taught year 3-4, which is a while ago now, and so it was great to read it with them. They were really invested in the characters and the excitement. They liked the fact that it was fast-paced and lots of things happened, and that a lot of the chapters were quite short, so it meant that we could read whole chapters as opposed to stopping in the middle of a chapter when, you know, we only had a couple of minutes to read. So that was a really great experience. I'm so glad that I read that, and now I can go back and reread the second book and finally read the third book because I have not picked those up yet. Or maybe those might be good for face-off weekend, or maybe they might be too long. I don't know. Anyway, we'll see. Then the rest of these books I read for the Amazing Readathon. So I'll talk about them very briefly and the prompts that they're for because this video is very long and I do not want to spend hours editing. Jumping straight in with the next city prompt that left off from last time, and that was Berlin's city prompt, and we had to read a book with a word that symbolized movement in the title, and for that I read Hang the Moon because you can hang. So this is a traditionally published contemporary romance by Alexandria Bellefleur. This one is about Brendan and Annie. It is a siblings best friend romance in that Annie's best friend's brother is the person that she falls for. He is a hopeless romantic who has this dating app that he runs, and he believes in matching people up to find their true love. Like, he's the hopeless romantic to end all hopeless romantics. And Annie, she is a bit more skeptical. And when Annie comes to town unexpectedly to catch up with her best friend and finds that she's not there, her best friend asks her brother, Brendan, to just keep an eye on her and make sure that she's got access to the house and things like that. And this then prompts Brendan, who hasn't seen Annie in years but has had a crush on her for the longest time, to show her around the city and get to know her a little bit better and try to prove to her that true love exists. So it was fun, it was queer, we have bisexual representation in here, loved it. Then I moved on to sightseeing. So for 100 points I read a novella, Lumber Snack by May Harden, I think it is. And this is a Christmas novella about an art teacher who accidentally crashes her car in a snowstorm and ends up on the farm of a guy called Sam. And then they have this, you know, a couple of nights together when they're snowed in, and yay, they fall in love. Like, it's very short. And then for 200 points, I read a book with a first-person narrative. I read Haunted by Christina C. Jones. I have not read Christina C. Jones in ages, so this was really fun to revisit. This is a black love, supernatural kind of romance story in that one of the main characters is revealed to be immortal. And our female protagonist, Khalida, runs a very upscale bar in a hotel, and her boyfriend is just demanding and rude and not really what she's after, and she's thinking that the whole time. And then she meets Aram, who is coming in as an investor for the hotel, but he has a connection to her that she doesn't really know about. So it was really fun and intriguing. I think the world building could probably have been upped a little bit just to get more of a sense of where things are, but I would be interested in continuing the series. Then I read another 100-point prompt, and that was to read an author that you have read before, and for this I read His Grandfather's Watch by N.R. Walker. This is an contemporary story about two men who meet when one of them comes into a antique store because he has his grandfather's watch. His grandfather has passed away and he wants to find out a little bit more about this pocket watch. And so the guy that is doing the appraising is the guy that he ends up falling for. And together they discover that the grandfather was actually queer and was in love with his best friend. But when his parents found out, some things happened to separate them. And it is also about the connection between the grandfather and the grandmother as well, and it was a really lovely short novella story, and I really enjoy N.R. Walker's writing. I think it's just great. It's always fun when you get romances that are two couples across generations. Then for 300 points I reread or re-listened to Magic Bites by Ilona Andrews. This is the first book in the Kate Daniels series. I really do not need to talk about this book anymore because I have talked about it multiple times on this channel. Urban fantasy, paranormal, with a romance that is a slow build throughout the series, but 100% counts. This whole thing is just great. And I have decided that I'm just going to put a lot of the graphic audios on my potential list as background because they fit many of these prompts. Another book I'm not going to talk too much about because I have an entire vlog where I was reading this is The Hunt by Nichole, which I read for the 500-point prompt to read a book with a foiled cover. I did this as a try-chapter video, so I'll leave that linked on the screen. It is a why choose romantic suspense-ish kind of story. Then for 100 points, I read Splintered by Tal Bauer. This one, I'm not sure how to recommend this one because this one freaked me out a little bit in a good way. So I read this for the genre blend because it is a romance and there is an HFN, but it's about two men, Ben and Evan. They've been together for a long time, they live together, but suddenly it seems like they are growing apart. And Ben in particular, Ben who is a teacher, feels like Evan is slowly changing and putting distance between them. And this one goes through a very paranormal horror kind of spin where Evan is having night terrors and speaking in weird languages and is increasingly violent towards Ben. So this one comes with extremely high content warnings for partner violence and blood and self-harm and all sorts of things. And it also looks at exorcisms. So just be aware when you read this one. I mean, Tal Bauer writes it really well, and it's one of those stories where you're going, is it mental illness or is it something supernatural, and do we ever find the answer to that? So yeah, I'm not sure I would be able to recommend this Tal Bauer book to absolutely everyone, unlike the rest of his books, which I just push on people all the time. Then for 200 points, I read a book that was the 4th book in the series, and that was Ranger by Rebecca Sharp. This book is for anyone who likes, I don't know what I said, but what I intended to say in this clip is, if you like Criminal Minds and Spencer Reid, then you will like this book. So if you are a Spencer Reid fan, the hero in this book is essentially Spencer Reid. It is about Sydney, who is a romance author, and she has just gone through a bad breakup, and the male protagonist in her very popular book series was based off her ex. And so in her last book, she killed him off, and now everyone is out to cancel her and sending her hate mail, and she just needs to get away. She ends up in this small town, and she's renting this garage apartment from Ranger, and the two hit it off. He is delightfully awkward and very knowledgeable, and he works for his family's private security company. I'd actually really like to go back and read the other brothers' books because it's fascinating. But due to circumstances, they end up in a marriage of convenience, which is just adorable because he is the most delightfully sweet cinnamon roll of a hero. He's totally not alpha in any way. He's constantly trying to prove to his brothers that he's actually capable of doing some of the things that they can do because they just try to protect him all the time. But honestly, I had a great time with this. Then, and I've forgotten how many points this was for a book that had a non-human character, I read the 2nd volume of Sacrificial Princess and the King of Beasts, and I had a really great time jumping back into this. It's been a while since I read it, so it took me a second to sort of get back into the story, but it is about Sarifi, who has been chosen by the King of Beasts, and everyone in the court is just not happy with this. But I really loved in this one that she begins a really lovely friendship with Amit, and it's just very, very sweet, and the artwork in this is absolutely gorgeous. Then we had the 4th leg of the race, which was our Paris stop, and for this prompt you had to read an award winner. I read Dirty by Kylie Scott, which is the 1st book in her Dive Bar series, and this book won an ARA award here in Australia, so that's why I picked it. And it is about Vaughn and Lydia. Lydia is getting married, and she is getting married into a very wealthy family who treat her like absolute rubbish. And on her wedding day, she finds out that her husband is cheating on her with his best friend and best man, and she freaks out and she runs away, and she ends up next door to this massive house where Vaughn lives, and he is a musician whose band has disbanded. He's kind of at a loose end, and he thinks he's going to be selling this. He's come home because he thinks he's going to be selling this house, and they end up staying together and working at his sister's bar. And you know, there's a really lovely found family element in here. I will say there is a lot of body shaming and fat phobia in this book by other people, so just be aware of it. It was kind of messy, but it was also kind of fun. Another one that I can't remember the points of was to read a book with a map, and for this one I read Brutal Perfection because it has a map. It's a dark, light contemporary romance by Saxon James. This book in and of itself, you cannot buy anywhere. It is an actual book. She released it through her Patreon and then had a special pre-order for special editions for Patreon. It will be released at some point, but it hasn't been released as of yet. So this one is set at an elite college, and this college has a secret, and one of our protagonists, Garrett, is coming in as an out-of-town boarder, and he is not part of the rich and famous and elite, so he's there on a scholarship, and as soon as he gets there, he knows something is up and something is weird. Our second protagonist is Austin. This is an MM romance. Austin is one of the elite and is quite aloof and very dismissive of Garrett initially, and is engaged to one of the girls on the campus who is she is delightful. And when you figure out her story and how she fits into all this, she was one of my favorite characters. But it is very much a political maneuvering, very wealthy people being absolute trash kind of book, and not the characters in here, but the parents of these characters being absolute trash. I don't really know how to describe it without spoiling it because the whole thing is like a giant spoiler, but suffice to say it is about Garrett and Austen falling in love and then having to find a way to be together despite the fact that Austen's parents are deeply, 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 dangerously homophobic and in positions of power where they can do all sorts of things. So this one is full of content warnings and was probably the most different Saxon James book that I have read. But yeah, it was an interesting time. All right, then for 200 points, I read a book that involves food. And for this, I reread Upside Down by N.R. Walker because why not? There is a group of people on this bus called the Soup Crew who exchange recipes. So that's food. Plus, every time these two go out on a date, there's food involved and they describe it and it sounds absolutely delicious. This is a contemporary romance. It is set in Sydney and it is two ace main characters. There is absolutely no sex on page in this book, but it is one of the best romances that I have ever read. And it is about Jordan, who is a librarian. He has just figured out that he is probably ace. And he is kind of reluctant to add another label to himself, but he ends up going to an ACE support group to kind of find out more. Well, he's kind of dragged along by his best friend who wants him to go so that he doesn't feel alone. And there he meets Hennessy, who is actually the guy that he keeps seeing on the bus and has this massive crush on, but has never worked up the courage to speak to. And he's running this group. And it's the two of them getting to know each other. And then they start to get to know each other on the bus, but they only have like 5 minutes of crossover time on the bus. And so they start asking each other these questions. And it is the most delightful thing. And the questions are awesome and just completely random and weird and really insightful to who their characters are. And yeah, it is just very sweet. It is very wholesome. I spent the entire book with a grin on my face. So if you have not read it, I highly recommend it. And if you're not reading it this month, read it next month for the Australian Readathon because it counts. Then for 200 points for the prompt book with a romance, I read the manga All You Want Whenever You Want. This one was recommended to me by Shay because it also fit the Buzzwordathon prompt for the month, which I've already covered off on, but I still had it anyway, so I decided to read it. It is an workplace romance. It is an opposites attract thing. It is very explicit on page, be aware of that going into it. Then for the prompt illustrated cover, I also read another manga, which was The Man That Shattered My World, or Who Shattered My World. Again, manga, very explicit. Don't know how I feel about this one. I probably need to go back and reread it. Oh dear, I did not write down the prompt for this next one. It was a sightseeing prompt. I will put it on the screen when I figure out what it is. I read Friendly Fire by Saxon James because, yay, I'm on a Saxon James kick. This is about Rafe and Cam, who were high school best friends. They were together all the time until one of them moved away, and then sort of this rift developed between them. And now they're back in the same hometown. One of them is living with their high school sweetheart, and he just feels like their relationship is completely stuck. They break up, they get back together again. It's expected. Everyone's waiting for them to get engaged and to get married and to have kids, and he's just feeling the pressure. And both our protagonists, their mothers are best friends, but also highly competitive. It's one of those parents meddling kind of situations. One is determined to get under the other's skin and get him back as a best friend. It's also an ace awakening kind of story. And this was the part that I really deeply appreciated in the story, was the exploration of what it means to suddenly realize that you're ace and what that means to you and what that means for you in a relationship, should you choose to be in one, and the fact that you can find people who are supportive of that, because if they love you, then they have to accept all parts of you, right? So it was a really interesting exploration of that. There were plenty of puns as well, so Saxon James really likes including puns in her books because I had a lot of fun with that. All right, nearly there. So for 500 sightseeing points, I read a book with all 5 vowels on the cover. And for this, I read Waiting for It by Allyson, which was one of the backlist books that I pulled out of my Kindle star jar at the start of the month. All of the 5 vowels are included in the title, in the author, and also the tagline on the front of the cover. So it just had to be on the front of the cover, so it's here. It is a why choose workplace romance set in a gaming company. It is a boss, his employee, and another character who works at the same company but doesn't fall in that direct chain of command. The two guys are trying to win over the female protagonist, but they've also had a moment in the past where they've been together, and when she finds out that they're trying to compete for her, she cracks it. Thank goodness, because we don't stand for that. I don't think they grovelled enough, but there were lots of configurations within this relationship, and it was a great bisexual rep story because every single character in here was bi, and I thought that was great. And there's also a little bit of workplace corporate intrigue around the release of a video game. So it was an entertaining short read. For our next city prompt, which was Cape Town, which was to read a book with nature on the cover, I read The Spellshop by Sarah Beth Durst, which actually arrived the day before this prompt dropped, so it was perfect timing. Thank you to Pan Macmillan who sent this to me. It is a review copy. It doesn't come out until the end of the month or the start of July. But my goodness, this is a gorgeous, cozy fantasy story with the sweetest romance threaded through it. So this is about Kiela, who is a librarian in a big city, but this city is being overthrown and the library is being burnt. And she's frantically trying to save as many books as she can and then take them away from this place. And she and her talking houseplant, or spider plant called Kaz, end up traveling by boat back to her home island, which she hasn't been to since she was a kid. She's basically forgotten everything about it, but as soon as she steps foot on the island, she begins to remember things about this place. And they're all just a little bit magical and beautiful. She is very aware that she has stolen books, and in particular, she has stolen books about magic from the capital. And she's terrified that someone is going to come looking for her. But she and Kaz move back into her family's old cottage. They begin to set up shop. And she is determined to kind of help this island, which has fallen into disrepair because sorcerers used to come and travel to the islands and make sure that they were prospering, but they haven't been doing that. And she now has spell books, and she's like, well, maybe I can help, because the islanders have been really kind to her. They remember her, they remember her parents. They just help her out, particularly Laren, who is a merhorse farmer who has a beautiful little herd of merhorses who are gorgeous, and he's just deeply intrigued by her, and that's because he knew her when she was a child. And he just, you know, turns up and offers to help, and their relationship is incredibly, delightfully awkward, and she's very naive and she doesn't realize that he is interested in her. Like, it's super sweet. There is spells and magic and friend making and jam making, which is a front for the spell making that she's doing, talking houseplants, forest spirits, mermaids, storms, bakery fun. It is so nice. It was a warm, cozy hug of a book, and I'm so glad that I read it. And then my final sightseeing prompt before face-off weekend was the 300-point prompt to read a book with an animal on the cover, and for this I read Dinosaur Sanctuary Volume 1, or reread it because I have read it before. And this is to give myself some GRC back because it was a host pick. And will I be reading volumes 2, 3, and 4 during face-off weekend? Yes, I will. This one is about a dinosaur park that is in Japan and the new employee who is working there and learning the ropes and figuring out that things are pretty tough for this little dinosaur sanctuary because there's not enough money. The owners are thinking about selling some of their star attractions, and she is, you know, a little bit naive as to how to actually work within a dinosaur park, but she is determined to do it. She's very positive and upbeat and brings some new perspective for the other characters in the volume. So I'm looking forward to continuing on because it's been a while since I read the first one, and it was just nice to come back to it. And that, my friends, is my wrap up. In the interests of not having a massively long recent reads video next week, face off weekend books are going to be in their own separate vlog, so stay tuned for that. In the comments, I'd love to know if you've read any of these books, if you're planning on picking any up. Otherwise, feel free to share something that you have read and loved in the past week. If you want to let me know that you're here but you don't want to leave a comment, feel free to leave any kind of plant emoji down below. Otherwise, I hope that wherever you are in the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I'll see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye, everyone.